So with these SQL problems, the first thing I would say is like you really want to have an idea of. I personally call it like the dimension of the data. People really like the word is like the grain. Okay, so it's like get a sense of the grain of the data. Okay, and by that I mean like what does each row represent? And I think I'm pretty sure we did talk about this earlier in the course, but now that we're back, this is the first step, okay? So with window functions, with group by functions, this is really like the hard part. So let's take a look. So I loaded this data set, and the first question is just like, what is the grain of the data? What does each row represent? So the grain of the data is, let's see, it's like each day for a different store, right? You can imagine this is a Favorita. They're like I think they're a grocery store. So for each day, like you say there's 25 different retail stores, how many transactions were there for each day? Okay, so this is per store, per day, right? For each store, for each day, how many sales were there? Cool. So we just save this to SQL, and one thing that's kind of, I guess, like, if we say we want to find like the average number of transactions across all stores, again, like even it's a pretty simple group by, but even just to do that, you should think about like the grain of the data. Okay, so right now we have, a separate row per each store per day, and if we do like how many across all stores across all days, right? That's going to give us back one row. Okay, so it would be like select this. Let's just say select. Just copy this. Select average transactions from store transactions, right? So how many rows are going to get back from here? Just one, okay? This is average transactions across all store, per store per day, right? Across all stores, across all days. So the average is, I guess, 1694. And then, of course, if we want to say like average per day, we kind of all know this, or we can do like group by date. Okay? So so now what's the grain of the data? This represents a different day, right? Each row is a different day across all stores. So you get what this is why you have to just make sure you take that moment to realize like what does my original data set represent? Because if you don't do that, then it's like average transactions for a given store for like a given day. This is average transactions by day. So maybe we should see that too, right? You can do the date, across all stores. Okay, so this is group by. And then the thing that it's like that we can compare it to is limit 5 is window functions. So let's now see that. So notice, of course, like with group by, group by changes the grain of the data, meaning that we started with a separate row for every store per day, right? So it's like number of stores times by number of days, essentially. And then when we did group by, we changed the grain of the data, so now it's just one row per each day. Cool? So group by, let's just write this down. Group by changes the grain of the data, right? Meaning like it changes the dimensions. Window functions, oftentimes we can perform the same aggregates, but it does not change the grain of the data. Okay? So let's just see that. So we can do this. So it's select date. We can do average transactions again. We can do date, ID, I think it's store number. Let's just do transactions to start. Okay, cool. So we're back to our original ID, store number, date, transactions. And now we'll do a window function, and we'll do actually transactions. And let's add a new column for average transactions. And then I'm just going to put over parentheses here. And that's how I normally start, is just like literally writing this out. And this is our window function. We're just going to call this as average transactions. Okay, cool. So here you can see we still have the ID. We still have a store number. So each row represents, a separate store on a separate day. But notice this average transactions column is added in here. And notice it's that same number. This is across all stores, all days, right? So it's the average over the entire data set. All right. The difference between this and group by is that here, this is changing the grain of the data. So even without a limit, there's only one. I'm not quite sure why we're getting actually. I could be. I would expect this number to be the same. It's a little off. I'm actually not quite sure why. Let's see. Do I have a limit here? Oh, I'm doing a group by. That's wrong. Here we're not changing, right? So now we have the same number. So here we're down to just one row. Here we're not changing the grain of the data. Every row is still represents one store per day, how many transactions were there. Okay? So how could something like this be useful? Well, let's say you want to compare, we can see that there's 770 transactions here, but you want to maybe get a sense of, is this high or low, right? So what's the deviation from the mean? So you can do something like that with a window function, okay? So we can say average transactions, or we can say the number, let's do it this way. We'll say the number of transactions minus average transactions, and then we'll call this the deviation from average transactions, okay? Or difference. Let's call it difference. It's an easier word. Okay? So this one has 924, less than the average. This one has 416, more than the average, right? So you can start to see that, what's the benefit of this? Well, we can kind of use this math equation across the entire data set, but still kind of also have our information on a per row basis, right? On our per store, per day basis, right? If I did it this way, if I did group by, I'm losing that. I've lost all the individual stuff, right? And I'm down to just a single row. So that's the idea of a window function, is we still get to, right, perform these kind of aggregate functions over, we're going to get to this. This is called the window. Over a window, right now my window is the entire data set, right? And we maintain the original row. Another way to think about window functions is the window function is really only per this column. Okay, it really only has an effect on this specific column. Whereas when you do a group by, you can see it changes the rows, so it has an impact on the entire return value. Here, it's really just per this one column. Any questions about this before? We're going to now just change the size of the window, but any questions before we do that? Okay, cool.
Hey Jeff, a quick question. So if we wanted to compare the average transactions per group with the average of the all transactions, so in this query you will say average of transactions minus average of transactions over. So this over is what denotes that this needs to do over this specific range, which is empty, means all the
Right,
rows.
exactly. So this is now the entire data set. But let's say, we can get to that now. Let's say we want to say this is, remember we have average, right now this data set is per store, per day, how many transactions are there? Let's say we want to, and we're comparing across the entire data set. Let's say we take this day and we want to say, is this day good or bad for this store, right? So how do we do that? In that case, we want the window to be the entire data set. We don't want to calculate the average of that. We want to calculate the average for each store, right? So let's move to that. So I'll put this in a new line here. So I'll read SQL, the ID, the store number, the day, number. Let's just do number of transactions for now, or let's just do average transactions. So average transactions over, and then here will be partition by. You're just using these words. partition by, like what do you want to split up the window by? And here we'll say the store number. Okay? And we'll call this average per store. So now, notice that this is kind of interesting, right? Because just note, we'll review how we did it, but just notice the result. Here we're getting the same number, 1523, for all the store ones, okay? Once we get to, store 54 at the end, it's a different average, okay? So how did we do that again? It's really this part right here. So we're saying the average transactions over, and then over what window. This is really like saying like over what window. Over a window that's partitioned by my store number, okay? And you can change, this can be different. This could be the sum, right? So sum of, like, what's the total number of transactions across all days, per store. Like, you could do that. So now for store number 1, the average transaction is 5 million, something like that. So you can change this. But just to go back to the average, so the average transactions over partition by store, and we could say average transactions, probably, you could do something like, you could go back to this, right? It would be transactions minus. So if we want to get, is this high or low for this store, right? This would be the number of transactions in this row, right, per this day for this store, minus the average number of transactions for this store. Okay, because remember, I want to figure out, is this high or low for this store? So that would be transactions for today, for this, for this store, over the average in general for this store. And how do I do that? I set the grouping, or what they call the window, to be the store number. All right? And we'll call this difference from store average. All right? And now, here we have, this is the difference from the store average, right? So this was 1,500. So because here we're at 2,000, right? It's 500 above. Here this is 300 above, right? A little over 300 above, below average. Okay, way below average. So this is like, you can imagine how this is used, right? You may want to see, like, okay, like, does this, what are the days that this store does particularly poorly, right, for this store? Because you would imagine that a store like in Manhattan maybe does better than a store, in a more rural area, something like that, right? So it's not fair to be like, oh, yeah, it's worse than average, but is this bad for this store? And then the same thing, like, let's just do it more. You can imagine doing it, like, per day. So what would that be? Just partition by the day. Partition by date. And it would be the number of transactions, and then minus let's just do average transactions. So this time, what is it? This is average per day. So select these columns, ID, store number, date, number of transactions. Here's the average number of transactions. We're not going to change the grain of the data, but we're going to say that this is basically grouped by, or the window here is the date. So every day, across all stores, what was the average number of sales for this day? Okay? And now we should see the same thing for each day. So this is all January 2nd, and you can see that this is consistent. When we get to 2017, August 15th, right, these days are consistent. Let's ask the question. Okay, why couldn't we do a group by within over? Yeah, you would not do that. You wouldn't do the group by here. If you do a group by, it doesn't even, syntactically, it won't even allow this. You say like group by the store. That's not going to be allowed. You want to think that, one thing is, remember, group by changes the grain of the data, whereas window functions really only apply to this one column. Okay? So they're kind of, you can do both. Like, and we can get into that, but within a column, like a group by does not make sense because it's going to have impact beyond that column. All right, so that's not going to work.
Hey Jeff, quick question though. Like, I understand when you say that group by impacts all the grain of the data and it sort of condenses the grouped records. But that is something we are not doing in this case over the whole select result set. We are just doing it within this over. So I was assuming partition by and group by will essentially be the same when it's at least done.
Yeah, it's different syntax. Yeah, maybe they could have used the word group by, like the inventors of SQL, but it's partition by. Yeah. Let me show you one more thing. Before and then I'll give some labs. So I guess I want to show you what if we did do a group by and a window function. Okay. So how would something like this work? Let's start back with our original data set. So here's the ID. So what's the grain of the data, right? Each store for each day, how many transactions did it sell? Okay. Now let's say, how do we do this? Let's say we want to get, let's say we just want to get the average per day. So let's do that. So how do we do this? I don't know if we can, let me see. So we're going to do from store transactions, group by. Yeah, it's actually not going to, I might have to wait to teach you guys this. So if I do a group by, ID, store number, date, transactions, from store, group by, I should do something like the date, and then average transactions. I apologize. Okay, so we just changed the grain of the data, because we did a group by. All right, so now we have for each day, what is the average number of transactions, okay? Now let's say we want the same thing again. We want to say, is this high or low? For this day, this is across all stores, is this a good day or a bad day? Right, compared to the average day. So to do that, it's actually not hard. You have to think that the group by first of all, the group by occurs first. So we've just changed the grain of the data. Okay? So now if we do this is average transactions per day. And then if I do a window function, it would be average transactions over parentheses. What would this be? Average all days. Let's see that. So you see that? Here I'm selecting the day. I'm doing the average per day. When I do a window function, you want to think this is happening after the group by. So we started with day and then the average for each day. And then what we did is we took the average across all of these rows. And we got the same number here. Let me do that one more time. So if we want to compare the average per day against the average of all days, and we can, we'll see something like this again, so it's okay if you're a little stuck here. But, let me just comment this out. Let's start from the beginning. So select date, the average transactions from store, and the way that we're getting this is we're doing group by date. So we're changing the grain of the data, so we just have one for each day. So this is kind of the first step. When you think about it, and also just in order of operations in SQL, the first step is the group by. After the group by after the dimension of the data is changed, then the window function comes in. Okay? So if you want to compare, how we do on each day versus all days, first just think about what's the grain of the data you want. So we want one row for each day. Then we want to tack on this calculation of what is the average for across all days. That comes, both in SQL, like both in order of operations, it comes last, as well as the way you think about it, it should come last. So that'll be the average transactions, okay, over, and then it would just be the entire data set. All right? And here you can see that. Okay, this is average all days. All right. Yes, SQL processes. SQL processes queries in this order from having joined where group by, right? Having then comes basically like what I think of as. I'm not sure if everyone can see this. I'll just copy this below. What Chris pointed out. So it's SQL processes in this order from, right? What's the data we're selecting? The join, where we're going to limit the data, the group by, and then having, right, happens on a particular group by. So like average transactions where it's having over 1,000 transactions, and then comes kind of like like what I think of as like the view level, like what do you see, right? And this window function is kind of like it's really done on like what you see, it's done on this like after the grain of the data has been changed. And then finally limit offset. The other thing to note is, so that's essentially all I wanted to talk about. So just when you're doing this, when you're doing any window functions, it's very common that you're going to have to do both a group by and a window function. I'm going to just say this like throughout the whole day. Do the group by first before that you do the window function. Think about what is the grain of the data you started with. Okay, so we start with date, store number, transactions. What is the grain of the data you want to end with? Okay, so if I want to end with average per day, average transactions per day, and then I want to get, is this a good or a bad day? What should each row be? Each row should be each day. How do I get there? How do I get from here to there? I need to group by day. That way I only have one row per day. Once I do that, press Shift Return, see the result. Once you do that, then you can add in the window function. Then only after you've changed the grain of the data, then worry about the window function. All right? That will, whenever I see issues, I'm sure I will, this is the issue I see. You're not doing the group by first. Okay? Cool. All right, I think that's good for now. So I can deploy this section. It would be, let's see, this one. Here's the SQL order of operations. And then if you finish early, you can get into the next set. All right? Maybe I'll just deploy 2 more. Questions before, let me just pull this up again. All right, so you kind of get, the syntax is funky. There's no way around it. All right? You're gonna have to know, that's part of the reason why I leave it to the end. Is just you're going to have to be kind of sharp with it when you get to an interview. All right. So it's just what's the aggregate, and then over, and then in the parentheses this is where the partition by what is the window. All right, if there is one.